Welcome, Cherie.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me and for the lovely accommodations. And I'd like to mention that my home group is Steps to Recovery in Yakima, and we meet every Wednesday night. And we are the best Alanon group. We celebrate birthdays and have birthday coins and birthday cake once a month, and so that's the best Alanon group. So I would like to start by reading something from some of our literature. It's our book, How Alanon Works for Families and Friends. And it's on page 17. What we fail to realize or accept is that alcoholism is a disease. An uncontrollable desire to drink is only one symptom of that disease. So many of us have longed for the day when the alcoholic in our lives would find sobriety, only to be dismayed when sobriety ushered in a whole new set of difficulties. Taking care of one symptom, even a major symptom, does not cure the whole disease. Many alcoholics are fortunate enough to find sobriety, and through programs such as Alcoholics Anonymous are able to make a long-term commitment to recovery. There is great hope for those who are able to choose this path, but sobriety does not put an end to alcoholism. Although it can be arrested, alcoholism has no known cure. But surely, we argue, sobriety is desirable and there must be something we can do to help. There has to be something we can say that will make a difference, or some sort of help or support or information we can provide that will convince our alcoholic loved ones to get the help that they need, or to make sure that they continue on the path to recovery. Again, as the American Medical Association will attest, alcoholism is a disease. Would the right words stop the spread of cancer or make chemotherapy more effective? Would our help, good looks, higher income, or cleaner house overcome the progression of Alzheimer's disease? Our compassion and support might make a loved one's struggle with the illness easier to bear, but it is simply not within our power to cure someone else's disease. We are powerless over another's alcoholism. We did not cause the disease, we cannot control it, and we cannot cure it. So if we can't stop the drinking or guarantee sobriety, why should we come to Alanon? As Al-Anon's first public service announcement used to say, you can see what the drinking is doing to the alcoholic, but can you see what it's doing to you? I'd like to read that because, if nothing else I said makes sense tonight, at least that's part of the solution from Alanon. That's part of our literature. So I'd like to start at the beginning because that's where my story starts. My story starts at the beginning of my life, and I was born into my parents' story, and they had a life, and then they had kids, and they weren't professional parents, so they didn't have, any guidebooks on how to be parents, and so they just kind of were winging it like all of us parents do, and they did the best that they could, but when I look back at my childhood, I really think of it as very unattended. I feel like my parents weren't really there. My dad was a long-haul truck driver, he still is. So he would be gone for, maybe a month at a time. And it was, the late 70s, early 80s. So didn't have a cell phone because they didn't have those back then. So he'd have to find a place on the road and find a telephone booth or a payphone and call home. And if you are parents, you understand how hard it is to, make your kids do what you want them to do when you're there. So if you can imagine from thousands of miles away, they don't listen. We didn't listen, so he'd call home and find out what we were up to and try to discipline us from the road, and it didn't work very well. My mom worked full-time, I think to get away from us, because my brother and I, we were horrible children. And so she would work all the time, and she hired people to babysit us that just weren't good people. And today, even then, I didn't think she was a bad person. I didn't think she didn't care about us. I think she's just very naive. And I like to tell this story about her because it kind of tells you how naive she is. When my son was about a year old, she and my dad bought a farm and moved to South Dakota. And that's not the part that's naive, although I did tell her people move from South Dakota. They don't move to South Dakota, but they bought this farm and moved away, and they'd come back for a last load of stuff, and she'd come by my house, and it was just about time for Ricky Lake to come on, and I said, I'm going to go put the baby down and we'll watch Ricky Lake. So I just went into the other room for just a minute. I swear, it was just a minute. And she came in just kind of scratching her head. She had this puzzled look on her face, and I said, well, come on, sit down, we'll watch this show. And She said, well, tell me more about this Ricky Lake. I said, I don't know what you mean. She was a movie star. She was really heavy. She lost a lot of weight. She's got her own talk show. What more do you want to know? She's like, no, tell me about the operation. I said, what operation? Where she used to be a man and now she's a woman. I was like, are you kidding? I left the room for a minute, and in that minute, my boyfriend convinced her that Ricky Lake had been a man and had an operation, and, it was just like, that's how gullible she is. She's very sweet, but she's just very gullible. And to this day, if I'm telling her something that she's not sure if I'm joking, she'll say, is this a Ricky Lake thing? Because she knows. She knows she's gullible. So, that was the parent that was home, and so when she wasn't working and she was home, she just was very gullible. And we had these people watching us that weren't very good to us, and that just kind of set the stage for our life. When you experience abuse young, it has an effect on your life, and it directs the paths that you take. And so when I look back on my childhood, I really feel like my brother and I kind of raised ourselves. And kids will do that. They just don't do a very good job. It's kind of like letting your garden get overrun with weeds. So we were weedy children. And, and as a parent myself, I look back at some of the things we used to do in the neighborhood and think, we could have been killed. Nobody was watching us, and we could have been killed. But we weren't. We survived. And so I went on to make some bad choices and had some things happen that really kind of scared me straight onto a better path. And life marched along, and I made it through junior high into high school. And about my junior year, I found my alcoholic of choice. Like you guys have your drug of choice, he's my drug of choice. So, and I didn't realize it at first. Like when you try it first and you didn't like it, well, that's kind of how, I met him and I thought, ugh. He was this cocky guy, and I just thought, ugh, but he grew on me, And so I could see all this potential. He had so much potential, And my mom thought we were just friends, because I told her we were just friends, and she's gullible, so she thought we were just friends. But my dad was, when he came home, he's not gullible, and so I think he thought something was up, and he didn't like him. He could not see any potential at all, maybe potential for heartache. But what he could see was that I was 16, and he was 27. He was married. I got to tell you, I'm not a homewrecker. It's more like a recycling thing. She was done with him. He's not, I did not steal him. I just found him. Or he found me, I don't know, we found each other. And so my dad could see that. He had 2 small children, and so my dad had issues with this and forbade me, absolutely forbade me from seeing him. And, it was like when I was a little kid, like, how are you going to stop me? You're leaving again when? So when he was in town, I would just sneak around. And when he was home, or when he was on the road, I'd just do whatever I want. It was just the same old thing. So we're in this relationship, and we were together for quite a while, and he, was in the process of getting divorced the whole time, and he had mentioned that he didn't want any more kids. He felt so guilty that he wasn't with the kids he had, so he felt guilty about that. And I think that's part of the problem my dad had, is that he could see that up ahead in my life, if I chose to stay with this guy, it would limit some of the things that I could do. Like if you get together with someone who's never had kids, it's kind of like a blank slate, but when you get together with someone who's got kids, then you've got a whole ready-made family, and it's probably going to limit how many kids you're going to have. And he could see all that, and I couldn't see that. And he did mention that he didn't want any more kids, and I'm sure I heard that. But I know I've read in the big book about alcoholics being selfish and self-centered. Well, you guys don't corner the market on that. And we're sober. So when we're plotting against you, there's a good chance we're going to get away with it, because we'll outthink you. And so he said he didn't want any more kids, and I told him I'd take care of the birth control. So I decided I wanted to have a baby, and I took care of it. So then we were having a baby, and of course I didn't tell him it was on purpose. It was oops, and unfortunately he was still married. And I thought, man, this is a Jerry Springer thing. I never thought I'd be, I was thinking, she's going to be my kid's stepmom. But luckily, the divorce got final, when I was about 6 months pregnant, and I thought, great, now we can get married. Well, at that point, he had very little choices regarding whether or not he was going to be a parent again, but he had a lot of choices about whether or not he was going to get married again, and he wasn't going to get married again. So I thought, okay, well, we could move in together. That would be the second best thing, so we started, getting that underway. So we moved in together, and I had my appendix out when I was about 6 months along, so right before we moved in together. I'd already moved out, and he was getting ready to move in with me, and I had my appendix out, and he wasn't there. He was at the bar. He had a prior engagement. He needed, he's a musician, and he had a prior engagement, and he wasn't there. And I was crushed, because I thought, if I'm your friend and you're having your appendix out, I would be there. I would drop everything I'm doing to go be there. And he's, going to go do whatever he had planned already. He's not going to just drop everything to be there. And I started to kind of get an inkling that maybe he wasn't there for me. I knew, all my life my dad had been gone. Financially he was there, but emotionally he wasn't. It's really hard to be there when you're not there. And I was starting to realize maybe this guy was like that, and at 16 you don't know anything, but by 18 you're starting to maybe know something, but by then, we're having a baby, we're living together, I'm kind of, I'm in, and I loved him, so he did show up, after his gig that night, and then we had the baby, and he wasn't there. And he had forbidden me from talking to his ex-wife, and I already told you how well I do with being forbidden, so I just called her from work or called her when he wasn't home, or, because I'm self-will run riot, just, forbid me. And so I had already talked to her and said, if the baby comes on the weekend and the kids are with us, would you take them so that he could be there? And she said she would. And so I'm at the hospital, and he's at the airfair with the kids, and I'm pissed, between contractions. I'm not happy, and I'm not getting my way, and I'm not really in any position to get my way, It's kind of, you don't have a lot of choices when you're giving birth. So other than to be pissed and carry that as a resentment for the next 5 years, I kind of had it engraved on a rock that I carried in my pocket, and when he pissed me off, I'd shine it up and throw it at him. That would be the end of the fight. And you weren't even there when our son was born, you jerk. Until when our son was about 5 years old, he said, I'm not ever going to let you say that to me again. If you say that again, I'm leaving, because I'm not going to hear that for the rest of my life. I don't think it's good for our son. And I just thought, oh, you're going to leave me? How dare you? But I stopped saying it, and I realized that that's not a healthy thing. I didn't even have Alanon at that point, and I realized it was not healthy to continue to throw that. But for a while I did. And later I called her and said, why didn't you take the kids? She said, because he never called. And I was devastated. The reality, though, today, looking back, I realized my mom was there, my best friend was there, my son's godmother was there. I had strong women there with me that it was more important to have them there than it would have been to have him there. I couldn't have made that choice. I didn't know what was good for me, but my higher power did, and I had what I needed, even though it wasn't what I thought I wanted. So our son was born, we took him home, and we're going to live happily ever after, right? I think somebody should sue Walt Disney. I think we could start a class action suit, because I wasn't getting any happily ever after, and I'm starting to realize there is no happily ever after. So anyway, we take our son home from the hospital, we're living together, I'm figuring, I got everything I want now, at least, kind of. I can work on it. I've got him in my clutches, I'll work on it, so we're raising our son, and we're raising him. He's 3 months old. He's 3 months old, and my boyfriend has a gig in Ellensburg, which I don't know if you're familiar with Yakima, but Ellensburg's about 30 minutes away, and there's no reason to not come home. But he didn't come home. And I have no shame. It's just another character defect. I'll call you and ask you for information. I don't care how bad it makes me look. I need information. You don't come home, makes me homicidal. And I'm on the phone. And I'm like the CSI. I'm like the FBI. I'm like your worst, nightmare. I'm calling people, and they're giving me information just to get me off the phone, because I gotta know, And so what I found out is that he picked up somebody at the bar, and he spent the night with him, and that's why he didn't come home. And I was crushed, because for all the dysfunction I grew up with, my parents didn't cheat on each other, and I didn't know what to do with that. And I thought, the smart thing would be to leave, You know, my son was 3 months old. He wouldn't have known any different, but I couldn't leave because I'm hooked on him. You know, he's my addiction. And just the thought of leaving him, you know, you can't breathe. What are you going to do? You know, and you know, but I can't stay and have things be the way they are, but I can't leave. But I can't stay. I thought, oh, well, I can't leave because these poor little kids, you know, his existing children, I can't take their baby brother from them. They've just been through this divorce. I have to stay for them, you know. The reality is they were like 4 and 5, 5 and 6, you know. They wouldn't have cared. You know, this baby was just some interloper on their dad's time living in their dad's house. Wouldn't really have meant anything to them, but I couldn't leave. You know, and I had to have a reason. And then, you know, if you can't leave and you can't stay the way things are, you have to fix it. That's another thing that I do well. I'll fix you. I don't care if you don't realize you're broken. I don't care if you don't want to be fixed. You know, I'll fix you because you need it, because I know what's best for you, you know. So I thought I would fix him, but I know I'm not a doctor, so I needed help. So I got on the phone. You know, because they have the technology and they can rebuild him. You know, we just got to find the right people. So I started calling counselors. So I thought if we could just get into counseling together, if we went to counseling, that would fix it. And so I thought naively that you just pick up the phone and you call a counselor and they make an appointment and you come in. But they ask questions. You know, you call and they want to know why you're wanting to come in. And so I kind of told them what was going on. And they said, well, do either of you have a drinking problem? I said, well, I'm not even old enough to drink. I don't have a drink. I didn't know. Did you guys know that? You don't have to be old enough to drink to have a drinking problem. But I was 19 and I didn't know. So I said, well, I don't have a drinking problem. I mean, yeah, I drink. I'm dating a guy that's much older than me. He can buy for me. Hello, of course I drink, but I don't have a problem. You know, well, do either of you, you know, do drugs? And I said, well, you know, I'd smoked pot when I was 12 and I didn't like it, which I've heard now you're supposed to smoke it till you like it, but I didn't like it enough that I didn't even want to try to smoke it till I liked it. And I tried it again right before I turned 18 because it was after the whole Bill Clinton thing. And I didn't want to ever take a job and have them ask if, you know, do you do drugs? And I could say, not as an adult, you know, because I'm overthinking things. And so I said, no, I don't have a problem with that. Well, does he, you know, do any drugs or anything? I said, well, you know, I mean, he smokes a little bit of pot. You know, I didn't think it was a big deal. He smokes a little bit of pot when he gets up in the morning. He smokes a little bit of pot on his break. He smokes a little bit of pot at lunch. He smokes a little bit of pot on his afternoon break. He smokes a little bit of pot after lunch or after work, after dinner, he just smokes a little bit of pot all day. It's not a big deal. We'd never run out, so it wasn't a big deal. So they assured me it was a big deal. They said that they don't, you need to take care of this drug issue and then seek counseling. And I was like, are you kidding me? Well, yeah, we don't treat people who have, you know, drug and alcohol issues because they lie. Well, yeah, they lie and they cheat on you. This is why we need counseling. We are on the same page. But they said no. You know, and so you would think that, you know, a normal person would say, oh, okay, and just give up. But no. I just kept dialing the phone till I found somebody who would do what I want. But she had a stipulation. She said she would see us. She didn't know if there would be any hope, but she would see us if I would go to an Alanon meeting. So that's easy enough. I'll do what you want, so you'll do what I want. I understand how that works. You know, so I went to my first Alanon meeting. I was 19. I walked in there. There was this room full of old ladies. You know, they were probably like 35 years old. And they didn't have anything I wanted. Obviously, they had a problem, or, you know, they'd have been there and out with their solution. And I didn't hear anybody say, try 6 different meetings. I didn't hear anybody say, get a sponsor, work the steps. They may have said all that. You know, at 19, a lot of people have a big wax plug in their ears, you know, and I didn't hear anything. I just was there to go to the meeting I'd agreed to go to so I could get what I wanted. Because it's all about getting what I want. So I went to the Alanon meeting, and then I went to the counseling. We did the counseling for a little while, and the counselor finally said, you know, this is who he is. He'll probably burn out or die about 45. There's nothing I can do. This is just who he is. I thought, well, I don't have anything better to do. So we went home, and we lived our life, you know, and as far as I could tell, because I don't know about you, but if somebody cheats on me, I'm going to spend the rest of their life going through their stuff. Yeah? I'll schedule time every day. I'll go through your car, your glove box, your pockets, your phone, your mail, whatever you got. I keep up on it. Do a little bit here every day. It's like housework, except I don't like housework, but I do like reindeer games. So, that was my new hobby, if you will. So for the next however many years, I did not notice anything that would set me off, or if I did notice it, he could talk his way out of it quick enough. So I thought we were pretty much okay. And so time progressed, and we were living our life, and it wasn't that bad. We just were living our life. And the sad thing is, when I look back at it, if that's how it had been and just stayed that way, I probably would never have needed to go back to Alanon. I would have settled for that, and it would have been okay. I started looking around and realized, my son was in school, we weren't married, and for whatever rebellious stuff I went through at 16 through my early 20s, that's not how I was raised. My parents would joke and say, oh, we should probably get married, the kids are starting to talk, but we knew they were married, they were just joking. And I was just, you go back to what you were raised, and I knew that the way I was living was wrong. It was not okay with me. I had probably mentioned 1,000,000 times over the years. He calls it nagging, but if I change the words a little bit, it's not nagging. Maybe you just didn't understand what I said the first 1,000,000 times. If I just changed one word, it's not nagging. You're just maybe not that bright. I'm helping you. So, I just decided eventually that I was done. And I've heard a lot of people say, when you're done. And I knew I was done. And I thought I'd give him one more chance. I thought if I just said it just the right way, because I'm always thinking. The wheels are always turning. And so I knew he used to sell cars, so I told him, the lease on this vehicle is up. You have the option to purchase. If you choose not to exercise the option to purchase, the vehicle's going back to the dealership to be test driven elsewhere. So he very romantically proposed. He really did. It was romantic. And so then I started planning a wedding. And I was focused. His ex-wife was helping me. I was focused, planning the wedding. Nothing got in my way, planning the wedding. And it was going to be my way. Everything was going to be my way. All he cared about is that he didn't have to wear tails. He didn't want to wear tails. And he probably didn't want to wear anything pink. And other than that, he didn't care. Get in my way. I'm all about it. So I'm planning this wedding, and I did start to notice his behavior had changed. But I thought, he's probably just nervous. Once the ring's on his finger and everything goes back to normal, it'll be okay. I kept telling myself that. And the night before the wedding, we had a big fight, and I thought, is this what we should be doing? Is this the right thing? Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. But then there were things to think about. First of all, my dad had driven out from South Dakota to give me away. My dad, who said this guy was worthless as tits on a boar hog. My dad, who hated him. I could not let my dad be right. It would be easier to get divorced later than to let my dad be right. That was one thing. Secondly, I had received some gifts in the mail that I didn't like, and I'd already exchanged them. So how do you get married when you've already exchanged the gifts? That's tacky. Still easier to deal with it later. And third, I did love him, and I really believed that once it all settled down, it would go back to normal, it would be fine. So we got married. It was a lovely wedding. Everything went just the way I wanted it. And things did not go back to normal. But I was still continuing in my spy games and CIA stuff and all that stuff. So on one of my little trips through the yard one day, going through his stuff, I found this spoon. And it was burned on the bottom, and I thought, because remember, I've got no drug experience. But I've seen Forrest Gump, so I was sure it was heroin. And because, what else do you cook up in a spoon? That must be what it is, but then he's afraid of needles. He doesn't like needles. It can't be that. So, so I went in and found him and drug him out to his vehicle, and what is this? And he said, oh, it's just a little cocaine. It's not a big deal. And I said, well, I don't think you should be doing it here at our house where we have our business and our son. And he said he'd stop. And it was for a moment, I was my mother's daughter. I believed him. Oh, you're just going to stop? Well, good. That would be good. So he was going to stop. And And so, as the weeks progressed, he did not stop. The good news was we were married. The better news was I'd put him on my health insurance. So I called the doctor. I said, I think he's got a drug problem. I think he needs to go to treatment. And I picked up some books, and I'd read, I found out it's, when you're cooking it like that and smoking it like that, it's crack cocaine. It's hard to quit. You got to really want to quit. So I thought if I got him into treatment, and there was something in the book about that I should go to Alanon. Well, there's nothing wrong with me. Why would I need to go anywhere? And besides, if I could just fix him, I'll be fine, because there's nothing wrong with me. So I got him into treatment. I did sign a few of the papers. I was just helping him. He told me later that's forgery, but I mean, really, I was helping. It was just helping. So I helped him to treatment. He went to treatment the first time. I don't think that he stayed through the blackout period. If you've ever been to Sundown, it's a lovely facility. Just up the hill, there's the Pomona Tavern. It's not been open for a long time, but there's a payphone. So he called me from the phone. He'd walked out. And I'm sure he walked out because he knew if he'd called me from there, I wouldn't have come to get him. But he was helpless on the side of the road, and heaven knows someone else might have picked up my alcoholic and got away with him. I had to go get him. You can't just leave them on the side of the road like that. All that potential hanging out there. Especially on the road to a treatment center. Some crazy woman might have seen him. And so I went and got him. And he told me that things were going to be different. He didn't tell me things were going to be better, but he told me things were going to be different. And they were. Because if alcoholism's not treated, it gets progressively worse. It got different, all right. And looking back, he just wanted to be left alone. He just wanted to be left to drink and to use and just be left alone. And I've heard people say, if you think someone might be an alcoholic, take a look at their family members. If there's some crazy woman screaming on the front yard lawn, throwing stuff around, there might be an alcoholic on the couch just wants to be left alone. She's screaming at her children in the grocery store. There might be some alcoholic lingering somewhere that just wants to be left alone. And I would do drive-bys looking for him, because gang members are not the only ones doing drive-bys, at least not in Yakima, because I could go anywhere by way of where I thought he might be, and just as I was driving by, to see, to make sure, to know where he was, because if I knew where he was, I'd be okay. And so he was in and out of treatment. He did finally complete a 28-day stay out at Sundown. Didn't fix him, didn't fix me. Did some outpatient things. Didn't show up because I'd drive by and he wouldn't be there, and then I'd find him. And one day, I had the kids in the car. It was a Friday night. We had visitation for the weekend. I picked up his kids. I had our son, and he wasn't where he was supposed to be, so I drove to the place where I thought he was. I went in, I confronted people, I chased him out. The kids were in the car parked outside. This isn't something the addict did. This isn't something the alcoholic did. This is something I did. I could have gone home, talked to him later, but there was nothing in me that could have made me do that day. I was crazy. He just wanted to be left alone, but I was angry and I was crazy. And I didn't care that the kids were there. I didn't care it was a bad neighborhood. I didn't care that they were watching me chase their father. I couldn't stop myself because I was crazy. And, time marched on. The disease got worse. We ended up filing bankruptcy. For years, I blamed him. That was his fault. He smoked all that crack. It was his fault. But the reality was, if I couldn't feel good, I could at least look good. So I spent a lot of money, and I had to own my part when I got into recovery. And by this time, I was going in and out of Alanon. I found one sick meeting. It was very sick, a lot of angry women. There was one man that would come. I think we turned him. I saw him in AA later. I think he just went, oh, hell no, I don't want to be. There was this, all the women were angry. There was one little lesbian gal. She was angry. We were all angry. We just on the table. And you'd feel a little bit better because you'd purge yourself a little bit of the toxic stuff. But there was no solution. So we just show up and throw up once a week and then go home. Probably saved somebody's life. It was probably just enough to keep us from killing somebody. But I wasn't really getting better. And life at home was getting worse. And he would sneak out in the middle of the night. He'd tell me he's going to work late in the shop, and I could only stay up so late because I had to go to work the next day, and he'd wake me up when he came home. He'd throw his shirt over the clock so I couldn't see what time it was. So I got one of those day glow watches so I could say, it's 4 in the morning, where the hell have you been? And, I just was progressively getting crazier. And then one night he didn't come home. And when you come home late, I get angry. When you don't come home at all, I want to kill you. And the sad thing, when I look at it today, I realize, I know I didn't go to work that day, but I don't know where my son was that day. I was that out of my head. I don't know where my son was. I know I was waiting for him. We were going to have a little chat when he got home. So he finally came home, and I confronted him, and I hit him. And luckily, he'd smoked so much crack, he was so sucked up, he could wear his 13-year-old's clothes. And he isn't very tall. His ex-wife's really not very tall, and his 13-year-old wasn't very big, and he was wearing his 13-year-old's clothes. And he was fast, thank God. So I'm chasing him, he's running, I'm screaming, he's running, he gets in his blazer, and he's trying to get away. So I grabbed the bug screen and just hung on, screaming for him to get out and fight like a man. And thank God I had this moment of clarity where I realized, we're on a pretty busy street here. There's traffic going by. Somebody's probably going to notice what's going on here and maybe even call the cops. And when the cops come, they're going to have to take somebody to jail. Who's going to jail today? Well, I don't think it's Cracker Jack who's just trying to get away. I don't think he's going to jail today. I think I'm going to jail today. And then my son's going to come home from wherever he is to someone who cannot get off the pipe to buy a loaf of bread. And whose fault is that? It's not his fault because he's just trying to get away from a crazy woman. He just wants to be left alone. I'm sober, hanging on the bug screen of a vehicle, trying to assault someone. And then I really started thinking about it. I thought, when the cops come, they're going to go, didn't your mom teach you not to pick on people who are smaller than you? Then I'm really going to be angry. So I let him go and decided I should move out for a little bit. So I moved out. I didn't move far because we were working on the relationship. And so I moved out, and you got to know, when you're working on the relationship and you have such good relationship skills that I have, that meant we were still sleeping together. That's what working on the relationship means. Because he's got his arms around the pipe or the bottle, and I got my arms around him. How do you have a relationship with someone he couldn't have been in to be in. That's the way it was. So somebody gave me some information. It's funny sometimes when your higher power uses somebody to give you information that you didn't like in the first place, and they show up with information you never would want to get from your best friend, let alone some smarmy person you never liked, But she just wanted to let me know, just in case I wanted to know, that there was this gal that was spending the night at the house sometimes, just in case I wanted to know that information. And I thought, oh yeah, I want to know that information, all right, let me tell you. So it didn't take me long to figure out who it was, and she'd left some stuff there. She'd left some shoes there. I cut them up with a knife. They don't come apart like they do on TV. She's running and her little heel breaks. I really had to saw on those shoes with a knife. They come apart. The shower curtain, the shower rod, I just got a little. He came home. I confronted him. He left a crazy woman in his house. Not a good thing to do. So I called my best friends from high school, and we came and we packed everything up, and the refrigerator, his bathrobe, his snow boots, pretty much everything. So we packed everything up, and so I was living in a mobile home up the road, and it was kind of nice at first till I had everything he owned in the mobile home, and then it was like the, hoarder lady living with a trail through the house, So, and I wish I could tell you that I left it at that I'm that kind of nice person, but I'm not nice. So I called the landlord and said, just in case you wanted to know why you're not getting the rent, it's because he's smoking crack in your rental, and I just thought you'd like to know. Stick the knife in it, then turn it. So he got a 3-day eviction notice, so really I'd done him a favor, because he didn't have a lot to pack. So, So then at that point he decided he might have a drug problem. Up until then, he thought he had a nagging wife problem, I'm pretty sure. But after that, he thought he might have a drug problem. So he decided he wanted to go to treatment again, and So we started looking around, and nobody in Yakima wanted to help him. They pretty much like, we've done all that we can, but thank you. And so he ended up in Wenatchee at Valley General. I drove him over there and dropped him off, and you'd think we'd have been done by then, but no. Because I didn't want to look back and think I hadn't tried hard enough. Because what if I didn't, and I was still addicted to him. I couldn't let him go. And so we spent the next 28 days talking on the phone and deciding we were going to give it a try. And so when he came back from treatment that time, he had burned every bridge with his employment, so he couldn't work. And, he was 11 years older than me, so he'd always decided where we were going to live. He always made the decisions about everything. And it was like everything had shifted. All of a sudden, I had to make a decision about where we were going to live, and I had to make the money, and I had to do all this stuff. And I was pissed. I was furious how, for whatever that my dad wasn't there, he provided. And so I just didn't know how to deal with this, and I was just angry. But I think it was just enough to force me to go to Alanon, because there's nowhere else to go. I mean, that's really the long and short of it. There's nowhere else to go. Your family gets tired of hearing about it. Your friends are real tired of hearing about it. The grocery store clerk, the people you work with, the stranger you meet on the street and hold hostage, they're all tired of hearing about it, Like, leave them already. We don't want to hear about it. So, and my dad said, man, I'd never take your mom back if she did what he did. If she did to me what he did to you, I'd never. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, Dad, thanks for that. So I was going to Alanon. He came home, and I felt like I was learning to ride a unicycle and juggle, and I was pissed. I've even had people come up to me and go, oh, man, when you got here, you were angry. You were kind of scary. Imagine that after all I'd been through. So I started going to Alanon, and, those are some mean women there in Alanon. They said stuff to me like, well, you're not a victim, you're a volunteer. Couldn't they see how I had suffered, and they said, no, you chose to stay, and I, my car broke down, I had to walk to work, and my dad had never left me stranded, I'd always had transportation. They said, it's not his responsibility to provide you with a car. Get your car fixed or get a new car or whatever, but even if he was sober, it wouldn't be his responsibility. And I thought, jeez. And they started saying stuff like, the seventh tradition says we're fully self-supporting by our own voluntary contributions. So, in recovery, I got to buy myself a car and a house. And the house was kind of a Ricky Lake thing. He told me if we bought that house, if only we would buy that house, he would stay sober. It was a fixer-up house, and he would have something to do, and he would stay sober. And I thought, well, it's right across from a school. The drug dealer wouldn't bring drugs right across from the school. I don't think he went to school. Maybe he couldn't read. Maybe he didn't know that was a school, because he had no trouble bringing drugs. And I would go out there and scream, and my husband would say, he's going to come back and kill us in our sleep. And then I would scream at him, how dare you bring somebody to our house and come back and kill us in our sleep? Ah! So life was still crazy. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, I was going to meetings. And my life was getting better. During that time, the meeting that I had been going to, the angry meeting, had closed, because eventually a sick meeting will fold. And so I had to find another meeting. And so, it's really helpful if you go to more than one in a week. I didn't know that either. So I went to different meetings, and I started finding people that had what I wanted. I wanted to stay married. There were people there that were staying married. When I'd first come to Alanon, it seemed like everybody had just dumped their alcoholic, and they thought they got better, but that's the other bad news. You can dump your alcoholic, but you'll just find another one, or you'll give birth to one. Somehow you'll get one. You can't get away from it, because they're attractive. They're magnetic even. You can't be without a few. So I started being a part of my recovery. I started being on committees, and the really cool thing for a really sick, toxic, nasty Alanon like myself, you can go be on a committee with a bunch of alcoholics. You can take their hides off and go home. And you don't have to suffer from it, because they're not yours. So I go do, it's probably like a chihuahua hanging off someone's leg. I would go be on a roundup committee, and I just would be as difficult as I could be, just because I wasn't happy. And, so I would just go join a committee and just be this toxic little Alanon and go home. And it was fine, because that's where you work your control issues out, is doing service work. So, I probably owe a lot of amends at that level, but, I haven't got there yet. So anyway, I was doing service work, I was going to campouts, I was learning to have a life, because one of the other really mean things they had said to me was, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is the only life you're going to get, so you better be doing what you want to be doing, because no one's going to call cut at 65 and have you do it over. This is, the good news is this is it, and the bad news is this is it. But this is it, So, and really, they even said, is this the example you want to be for your son? Oh, that hurt. Because it wasn't. I was not living the example of what kind of life I wanted my son to have, So I knew that I needed to do something to make my life better, Whether my alcoholics, got sober or not, I needed to do something for myself. So I got into service. I, went camping, did committee work, was a group representative, got to be the treasurer. You just turn your back and someone throws you down on the committee tracks and you're doing something, So I was doing all kinds of stuff and getting out of his way. Because, I'll steal your dignity. I don't mean to. My intentions are great. But I'll do for you what you can do for yourself, even before you ask. And I'm sure I spent many years doing that. And so I learned to get out of his way. And my life got better. And it wasn't about whether or not he got sober, And I got to run into his little friend with the shoes. She was a bartender. And I got to run into her in recovery. She had not been on my fourth step because I didn't owe her nothing. And it was really kind of a hard deal to run into her. It's a small town, but it's a big town. You go quite a few years without running into somebody, and then they pop up, and it was kind of like, ah! And I, got to call people, because that's another thing they told me. When you're in Alanon, you don't ever have to do anything alone. My posse rode up here from Yakima to be with me tonight. And, I called people and talked it through, and they said, man, if you're in AA, we'd think you owe her an amends. Oh, hell no. Obviously, you did not hear my story right. She was sleeping with my husband. And I'd cut her shoes up, and I'd gone to her job and left her a condom as a tip, because I thought that was a good tip. If you're sleeping with my husband, it's a good tip. And then I took all my friends up, made her wait on all of us, and intimidated her, and, things that I would never do as a recovering member of Alanon, but as a sick individual, there's a lot of things I'll do. And so since she popped up, I prayed about it and got to talk about it and got to realize I did owe her an amends. I didn't have the right to damage her property. I had the right to leave him or stay with him, but I didn't have the right to do anything to her. And so I called her, because of course I still had her phone number. My dad had always said, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So I still had her number, and I called her and said, I think we need to get together. And she was assuring me that we did not. But she finally relented and said I could come out to her house, where she had a couple of really big Rottweilers. So I got to, buy her a gift certificate for some shoes, and I got to tell her about my program and how my life has changed today, and make right what I had done. And that's what my program has me do today. So, and with my stepkids, I got to back out of their life for a while. I had not been a good stepmom. I was angry, and I took it out on them. And so part of my amends to them was to just back up. Send birthday cards, send birthday gifts, send Christmas, but don't be in their face. They had to, do their deal. And, the blessing of that is they're in my life today. And the younger one called me when he turned 18 and said, thanks for being in my life. Thanks for all you did. And I just thought, I think you have the wrong number. But that is a testament to what recovery did in my life, and a lot of times people say, well, did he get sober when you went to Alanon? And no, he didn't. But he did get sober after I started going to AA. I wasn't drinking, but Al-Anons we're done with our meetings by about 8 o'clock, because we have alcoholics at home to take care of. So we meet at a reasonable hour so that we can be home to take care of people. So I was home going crazy, because I used to do those drive-bys, but then he stopped being where he was supposed to be, and gas prices were high, and I couldn't afford to go looking for him. So I just, I knew that there was a 10 o'clock meeting at Serenity Hall, kind of a crazy meeting, and I knew that I could go there and just be, and I could go and have coffee and just be there. And it was funny, they'd say, gosh, are you here looking for a date? Because, yeah, that's where I would go. I mean, really, it is where I would go. But I wasn't there looking for a date. And, then they said, well, have you crossed over to the dark side? I said, boys, you don't even know. Alanon is the dark side. Because if we kill you, 1, we'll get away with it because we're sober, and 2, it'll be on purpose. We are the dark side. But they would let me come and just be there. I'd been in service long enough. I knew enough people that they just let me come and be there. And I was out of his way. And, I never got completely well. I never quit doing drive-bys. I found myself in his email one day, and then I found myself at another bar confronting another woman. And this time I didn't have to, threaten her or be violent with her. I just talked to her for a while, and then I thought, it's been a long time, and I just don't think I can do this anymore. And I felt like my higher power said, if this is what it takes for it to be different, can you do it? And I said, no. I just don't, it's been a long time. It's been like 16 years. I just don't think I can do it. And then I thought, as a couple days went by, I thought, okay, if by, maybe I can leave this time, or we can leave without me having to steal his dignity, without me taking the refrigerator, anything else, maybe that's what it means to be different, and he got sober, and we went to a camp out. I was speaking at a camp out, and he couldn't sleep, and he went to the fire, and this guy prayed with him, and he got sober, and he found God at the same time, and it was funny, the next day he's like, well, and he told me this, and I said, yeah, I told you that. Well, he told me this. Yeah, I've told you that too, probably 50 times. Well, he told me this. Yeah, I've said that too. This guy didn't say anything to him I hadn't already said a million times. But see, when I talk, he hears the teacher from, Snoopy, wah, 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 wah. And at this time, he was ready, and he was able to hear that guy, and he was able to, to have it all happen. And the really neat thing is I'd been in Alanon for about 5 years at that point, because I can't imagine what my life would have been if I hadn't had recovery first, because there had been a couple false starts over the years when the ladies had said, if he gets sober, he'll probably want to have a key to the car. No. He might want to have his name on the checkbook. Well, you don't put a crackhead on the checkbook. You don't even write him a check. You write him a check and they change the amount. You write it for 5, it ends up 15. It's crazy math, and it makes it hard to balance the checkbook. So you don't do that. Well, he might want to make decisions. Well, I was doing just fine, making all the decisions. He might want to be a parent. He might want to be a man. He might want to wear the pants in the family. And I just thought, whoa. Because that illusion of control was firmly in place. And so thank God I'd had Alanon all those years before he got sober, so I knew that I had grown and I had changed, and I was ready to be in a relationship with someone who was sober. Because I look really good standing next to a drunk. They screw up all the time. Doesn't take much. I get to be the good guy, he's the bad guy, white hat, black hat. It's very simple. But when you're standing next to a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're like, ooh, I don't look as good as I thought I did. And it was like he'd been just dipped in this vat of bleach, and overnight he was all sparkly white and dewy, and I was exhausted from years of toil and stress, and I felt like God liked him better, because with an alcoholic, when you put a plug in the jug, life gets better pretty quick if you just keep doing the right things. With an Alanon, there's no plug. You got to keep dealing with people. They come from all over, work, home, family. There's more people all the time, and stress. And so, I realized that even though he was sober, it didn't fix me, because I probably would have become this sick even without him. So him getting sober didn't fix me. And I can't count on someone's sobriety to determine whether or not I'm going to be happy, because what if they don't stay sober? Then I can't be happy anymore? I can't let his sobriety govern my life. I have to have a life, and then we can have a relationship. And I didn't know that when I got here, because when I got here, I was living on Disney, and I thought we were going to ride off in the sunset, even though my mom said I was settling for a night in tarnished armor. Still, I could polish. I had time. But, I realized that here, and I realized today that life's not perfect today. We still got troubles. There are different level of troubles, but it's always something. If you don't like what you're going through, wait 10 minutes, because you'll be going through something else. You might not like that either, because it's always going to be something. But here I've learned life skills. Here I've got a toolbox full of tools to use, and if I don't know what to do, I have a phone list full of women I can call and say, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And if they don't know what to do, they probably know somebody who's been through something similar, and I don't ever have to do anything alone. And today I'm really grateful for Alanon. I'm really grateful I love an alcoholic. I was on the phone with my ladies when I was rolling to the bank to put him on the checking account, and they were all cheering me on, because I thought that was a day that would never come. He's got a key to the car and a key to the house, and he makes decisions, and he puts his foot down sometimes, and, life's good today. So, I realize that a lot of times my alcoholic's the anvil that God uses to beat me into shape, like hot iron. So I'm grateful I got to come share with you today. And I hope that you'll try Alanon if you're thinking that, if you find yourself standing on the front lawn screaming at people or telling the grocery checker all your troubles, come to Alanon and, let us love you until, you can love yourself. So thank you very much.